Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the YouTube channel for Loughborough's Ye Olde Parish Church, All Saints with Holy Trinity. It's great to see you and to have you with us this afternoon, particularly if we've popped up by random in your scrolling through the internet. It's great to see you today. So this is our weekly Muse on the Scriptures. Each week I'm joined by 3 different guests. Some of them are also Church of England ministers, some are from different churches, different traditions and backgrounds, and we just look at the lectionary readings. So the lectionary, the Revised Common Lectionary, is a series of readings that over 3 years takes you through some of the great themes of the scriptures, shared by Anglicans, Lutheran, broadly speaking with Roman Catholics, and some other churches, all the Methodists as well. Don't forget the Methodists. So yeah, has a lot in common, and different churches use it all around the world. And we look at the passages and we have a chat about it. Oh, and I'm very excited. Some people are already checking in. So if you are watching this live and you're able to comment on YouTube, do please let us know you're with us and join the conversation. Have a look at the passages with us. Tell us what you think. What do you see? What might God be saying to us through these scriptures as we talk together? So while my guests introduce themselves, I will be typing up in the comments the passages that we're looking at today, and then we'll get stuck into our conversation. So I'm going to press the magic gallery view button, reveal my guests, and ask them to unmute themselves and say hello and introduce themselves to you. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Sue Willits. I'm an Anglican vicar in Loughborough, as well as Wendy, a small church on the south of the town. And we were just reflecting on running. Running isn't something I do. Definitely not do that. Walk the dog a lot and for a long distance, but I definitely don't do running. And certainly not in competition with any of my family. John, what about you?
So I'm John. I work for the Diocese of Leicester as Mission and Communications Enabler. And prior to that, for 20 years, I was a kind of bog standard vicar. I'm married with 2 kids. One of them, both of them grown up, one of them married and left home. And I'm unfortunate enough to live in that part of Leicester, which has just been within the last 24 hours kind of locked down again. So I'm trying to find out what that means. But yeah, that's who I am.
Sure. It's great to be with you guys. I'm Sean Besson. I'm all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, where we have been in the hardest lockdown in the world, where we're rated as the hardest lockdown. So it's great that we're coming out of it, even though our stuff are picking up. But I run a part of a denomination called Kingdom Light Church, or it's what our church is called. We have a few churches here in South Africa and all across the world. And some places where we've done some church planting. I've been involved in ministry for full-time. Next year will be 20 years, but grew up in ministry, 4th generation of pastors, and grew up in a Pentecostal background with a little charismania, or whatever you want to call that side of things. But yeah, that's, so right now, I don't know what you would govern. I would say a little bit of Pentecost background where I come from. Yeah. That's me, and I run a little bit too. I've done a few marathons and stuff. So if we're talking about running, all running is good.
Yeah, but I run a little bit. I've done the odd marathon. Really, I jog. That's what I do. Anyway, thank you so much for saying hello to everyone. And Sue's done this with me before, so some of you will go, oh yeah, I've seen Sue and heard her before. John, Sean, welcome. It's the first time musing with me. I'll just say hello to those who checked in. So Michaela, great to have you with us. And Vanessa and Rachel, and this is brilliant. Someone called Breaching Badger, who actually said she's on a boy number 2's YouTube channel, hence the weird name, but hello from Melton Mowbray. I think that's my sister. Hello, Helen. And if it's not you, tell us who you are, Breaching Badger, brilliant name. And who else is here? Oh, okay, someone else from your church, Sean, Kingdom Light Church, or did you just post that yourself to create your own fan stream?
No, I shared it with some of the other pastors and guys, because I know I said to them, hey guys, I'm going to be on, take a look, you can. And so I shared it in the group. So I think on Kingdom Lights Facebook page, YouTube page, they've linked up on that way. Some of the guys.
Brilliant. Well, welcome to those who are watching and engaging from South Africa. Tell us about your context and what these scriptures are saying to you. Okay, that's enough introductions. We're going to dive in with the gospel reading. We are in Matthew, well, continuing in Matthew. We've had a lot of really tough readings over the last few weeks. We've been picking up our cross and following. All that really tough stuff. Matthew 11, there's a little bit of comfort right near the end about yoke being easy, but there's still some tough stuff in there, isn't there, Sue? Do you want to kick us off? What is this saying to you today?
Well, I alighted straight on the end because it's the familiar passage, isn't it? Come to me all who are weary and burdened. And I don't know about the rest of us as ministers, but I think as society actually at the moment, we are all weary and burdened, aren't we? We're living through this, but we're carrying it heavily. And that kind of struck me that we are carrying this as a heavy burden. And yet, although there is hard and tough stuff in it, actually there's so many good things that are kind of being revealed through it, aren't there, that I'm really struck on this idea of revelation. So in just the verses before, in verse 25, Jesus says, you've revealed these things to little children. And I've been reflecting on what does it mean to reveal something. So I have a new granddaughter who's 6 weeks old that I have yet to see in the flesh. But I was reminded of playing peekaboo with her sister, revealing who you are. And I can remember just a few weeks ago, I think she would have been about 2 weeks old at this point, my daughter-in-law saying to Molly over FaceTime or whatever it was we were using, WhatsApp maybe, saying, "This is your granny." And thinking to myself, poor child, she hasn't a clue. But there's that sense of revelation, of revealing stuff. What is it? I'm really struck by what is it that God's revealing to us at the moment through this whole pandemic, about compassion, about injustice. Then there was George Floyd and all the sense of racism and how we're trying to unpick what all that is going to look like in the future. So there's something really key about revelation. And as I read in this passage particularly, I mean, the NIV headlines it, "The Father revealed in the Son," from verse 25. And so I kind of think, okay, so Jesus reveals to us what God is like, who God is like. He reveals to us the nature of God. And yet there is that issue of how do we hear? How do we see what that is all about? And actually, I personally think these three passages are all about revelation, but we'll probably go there in a minute. But that sense of lifting the veil of, I don't know, when you were married, whether you wore your veil over your face, did you?
Too long ago.
John, did your wife? When she came into church, did she have a veil over her face?
No, she had the veil, but it was like already showing who she was, because I kind of knew anyway. But
so did I. I mean, I've been married 41 years almost, and I can remember very clearly my mother-in-law saying, "But you should have the veil over your face and it should be revealed." And I'm thinking, no.
I always used to discourage people from doing that at wedding rehearsals, because it's just always a messy thing. It never goes well. The bridesmaid gets her thumbs caught, or the groom does, and it's
not a good thing. Absolutely not a good thing. I try to avoid it in weddings too. But there is something, isn't there, about that revealing, when we lift the veil from something, when we can actually see what's really going on underneath, or who is really underneath. That I've never seen in this passage before.
With the section starts as well about the bit about, we played the flute, you didn't dance, we wailed, you didn't mourn, and John and Jesus have come, but people aren't seeing. So there's a truth that's not being heard, and something about actually, it's there for you, but you're not seeing it. That's a great place to start. Revelation. John, Sean, who wants to chip in? Is that where you go with the text?
Can I send it to John? Because in Genesis, the first time Isaac sees Rebecca is when she lifts the veil. It's there right at the end. I need to move my Bible quick. It's there right at the end, isn't it, of that passage?
Yeah.
What does he say? I can't remember what it says. Who is the man? She asks, who's the man? And the servant, I'd love to know what the servant's name is. That's really irritating me that I don't know. She took her veil and covered herself at that point. And then it says, the servant told Isaac all he'd done. Isaac brought her into her tent. And so there's that sense of revealing.
I think you might end up preaching on this on Sunday, so I can say, oh, you'll just have to do an extra sermon. I know you're going somewhere else on Sunday. Before, I want to just hold off on the Matthew for a little bit longer before we dive into Genesis. But because there is, so the Genesis text, if you're listening in at home, is edited highlights of Isaac and Rebecca's meeting, really, bits of chapter 24. But before we go there for further revelation, what else is in this gospel passage? Yeah, John, Sean, do you want to just...
So I'm massively interested in the fact that at the end, and this does, I know the chapters and that are really quite arbitrary, and just a monk sat in a room and made them up and put some verses in as well. So the chapters kind of don't really exist. But this saying of Jesus, come to me all who are weary and burdened, the famous fridge magnet verse, does come at the end of a section really, and then it goes into the Lord of the Sabbath and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm just interested at the end of a kind of as Wendy was saying at the beginning, almost unremitting doom and gloom in one sense. And Jesus sends out the disciples on an evangelistic mission. He says, look, you're going to go out, people aren't going to like you, the message of the gospel is going to split up and divide families, etc. John the Baptist disciples and all that sort of stuff, and Jesus being accused of being a drunken and a glutton, and harkening back to John the Baptist being accused of being a miserable, grumpy bloke. Jesus denouncing a bunch of cities, all of that stuff. And then Jesus says, within the context of saying, like, it's going to be really, really tough, guys, but take my yoke upon you. I'm gentle, I'm humble, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. What does that actually mean within the context of a whole load of stuff that says, actually, if you're going to follow me and be my disciple in an active, committed, public way, it's going to make your life in some respects harder, not easier? What actually is Jesus getting at there? I think that's the interesting question to be looking at.
And it's not if you would like to, is it? It's a take my yoke upon you. Mm-hmm. And when I hear it, I'm thinking, well, what, again, in our context, what is it? What is the yoke that we take? And I think a lot of us, this is quite a worrying time. So there's some comfort in there, but it's not actually just easy comfort, is it? It's more than that. Sean, chip in.
Oh man, I love this. This is an amazing scripture, because I think, as you said, and Johnny, same thing about. So you started with the revealing, and I think that is so powerful in this, because he is revealing the Father. He's revealing the side to the Father that was unknown from the context of what the law and the thing where it was very strict. It was very you did this and you would get this, you don't do this and you would get that. And here comes Jesus, and I think there's a beautiful moment later on in John where Philip says, reveal to us the Father. And he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You've seen this yoke that I bring that's so different that you can be in the midst of a storm and Jesus is in the boat with you. That's the heart of the Father. That's the revealing thing that says, though everything, you are so thirsty, you are weary, you are burdened with everything that's going on, my peace is in him. He's the revealing of that peace with the Father that doesn't want to push you away, but really wants you to come close to him and find that's the yoke, that is that burden that is light. It's not a heavy burden that we carry in him, because in him we find our rest. In him we find our peace. And that's where Jesus says, I'm revealing the Father to you. Though you have not seen the Father in this way, I want to show you this Father that doesn't reject you, but truly wants you to be close in relationship to him. And it's, for me, it's such a beautiful piece in Scripture. No matter what has been going on, like all of us are feeling the pressure, the tension of everything that is through this pandemic and life itself, even before the pandemic. And in 10 years from now, we're still going to feel those moments where things don't make sense, or you didn't do something, but you get the result of it. Like so many people that have lost their jobs. They didn't do anything wrong, but yet they're found in this place where it's tough. we've just had a very bad plus thing here in South Africa, where one of the reverend of the Dutch Reformed Church had committed suicide inside the church, as a just totally lost context of things, just overwhelmed by everything that was going on around him. And I found that's the place where he says, "Come to me, who are burdened through these things." And he's the one that gives us the rest.
That word rest is twice just in those little verses, isn't it? Come to me, all you that are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. And then it's reiterated, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. I wonder if there's a bit of a Sabbath sermon in here as well. What does rest mean? Because I'm not sure what Jesus has got in mind is lying on the beach in Ibiza, or just doing your crochet, or I don't think it's that rest, is it? I don't know. I'm not a Greek scholar. John, you're always my brainy person. Hasn't someone like Calvin or someone got something to say about this, John?
I think it is the idea of Sabbath rest being rest in relationship. It's resting in God. So I don't think that in the creation story, that when it says God rested, it meant he sort of poured himself a martini and put his feet up. I think it is that thing. I mean, I guess for God, it's that internal relationship that exists within the Trinity, etc. But I think whenever Scripture talks about us having rest, it's us knowing who we are in relationship to God and finding our security in that. Yeah,
it's not a superficial thing, is it? And I'm not sure it's a thing that takes away all your problems or your challenges. I'm thinking again about the context here. He's speaking to an oppressed people, isn't he? He's speaking to people who are living almost in slavery. Sean, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I want to mention in the beginning when she touched on it, he said, revealed unto babes, unto the if you think, when they ask you who's the greatest in the kingdom, and he reveals that, says this little child right here is the greatest. And I always wondered years ago, thinking about that context of that, a child just believes, don't they? If you tell them, listen, it's going to be okay tonight, don't worry, they believe. So I'm going to buy you a BMX for Christmas. Well, the kids don't get BMXs anymore, right? I'm giving my age away here. But they believe. They stand on the side and Father says, jump, I'll catch you. They believe. And I think that's what he's trying to reveal, that is that in him that's trust, that belief and obedience. And I love what Hebrews 4, when he talks about rest, the writer of Hebrews says that disobedience keeps you from entering the rest. The obedience of what? Of the word. The obedience that I trust him. His burden is light. His yoke is easy. I can trust him. I think that's the key to living, like you said, in relationship. That's where the rest is. It's not just in lying on a hammock on Mauritius or Seychelles or some island.
I'll take that though. I'll take that. There's some comments coming in. Rachel, hello Rachel. Rachel's great at this. Rachel says, oh, she's still going. Where are we? It's the revealing them to the childlike phrase. It's like, guys, slow down, stop over intellectualizing and tying yourself in knots. You don't have to fully understand it all. You have me. Like that, Rachel. It's very comforting to anxiety brain overthinkers. I think about the yoke and resting bit. It takes away the shame in not knowing. Like, you don't have to have an answer to everything. And she says, also slightly flippant point, Jesus sounds like my kind of mentor. Like, let's just have some wine and chat about it over some yummy food. I like that. Yeah, let's just go. And then Breaching Badger, who has confessed, is my sister. Hello, Helen. Are there some connections to be made between rest and the concept of shalom, complete rest, restoration, restitution, flourishing, etc.? And Vanessa's chipped in, I love the phrase, let me teach you because I am humble and gentle at heart. Jesus, being the perfect teacher, takes us to that perfect rest. I like that. We could go on more, but I think we'll sidestep into Genesis, I think, and then we'll come to Romans at the end, because Sue's kicked us off on this thing about revealing. She's very excited about the revealing. And the Genesis text, the lectionary kind of picks out various verses, but it's basically Genesis chapter 24. It's Isaac and Rebecca. So last week, poor little Isaac was about to be sacrificed, and we dealt with that last week. He's all grown up now. Sarah's died. So Abraham's parenting on his own, and he's got to get his son a wife. So I think I said before we were on air, I think this is like ancient Hebrew dating app. And off they trot to find a wife. I'm sure it means something much more deeper than that, though, does John?
Well, I got really interested in this because I always think with Old Testament sort of historical narratives, if you wanted to, you could pull out any meaning from any of them. Just some kind of theistic moral, and that's what it's going to mean for me. But actually, why is it in Scripture? What's it there for? What questions do we need to ask of that passage, and who are we in the story? So that's kind of how I always go to Old Testament narrative. And I think the two big points that come out of this particular story, one of them is the quite obvious one, that God is sovereign. And that's one that we can apply into our own lives. You get all these little God incidences. The servant that Abraham sends turns up at a well. Wells are always cool in the Bible, aren't they? My favourite conversion story in John's Gospel is the woman at the well. He turns up at the well, and this young woman turns up, and she happens to be the person who's going to end up marrying Isaac, etc. So there's something about the sovereignty of God and God's big plan. And I think in the Old Testament, you have to fit those little things into God's plan of redemption, because that's the Old Testament story setting up the new and all the rest of it. But the other thing that really interested me is this whole thing about God's people are distinct and God's people are called to be different. Because that's why, there's probably a whole bunch of pretty intelligent, wealthy girls around where Abraham and Isaac are living. Why not marry one of them? Why go on this journey? But the whole point of the journey is because, the book of Genesis, you get your first 11 chapters of your creation, your fall, Cain and Abel, Noah, Tower of Babel, all that stuff. The rest of the book is 4 generations of one family, and the family who are going to turn into the covenant people of God, or who are in the process of becoming that covenant people. And the reason that the servant is sent to get this wife back from Abraham's own people is about preserving the distinctiveness and the difference and the purity of the people of God. And you see that throughout the Old Testament. Some of the they look quite random and weird instructions to how to live in books like Leviticus and Numbers, or stories like Daniel in the exile when he gets carted off to Babylon. The big point of that story is you can take the boy out of Jerusalem, but you can't take Jerusalem out of the boy. And this is all about God's people being different. And often if someone says to us, I'd have never guessed you were a Christian, we think, that's a great compliment. Now I can witness to them. Actually, wouldn't it be better if they said, blimey, I knew there was something about you. That's what it is. And have we lost that sense? As the church, if Israel then is now the new Israel is the church, if that's what that's all about, have we lost that call to be distinctive and different? And I think there's something quite interesting about the difference of God's people in this, and that's why he had to go and get a wife from where he had to get her.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, as a woman listening to that, as a woman preacher, I'm always a little uncomfortable with the woman who's just a bit of property.
Absolutely,
and, interesting text. So I think, but I like what you said, John, about it's about kind of understanding why is it in there? Why are these stories in there? Why are they important? And then, what do we take from it? And it is this sense. This is salvation history, isn't it? This is the working out of God's purposes. This is the faithfulness of God to Sarah, who's now died. By the way, Abraham's still going, and he's going to have another wife and more kids. Yeah. I mean, this guy's prolific, really. So once he started, he was a late starter, but then he kept going. So there's something about the lack of agency for Rebecca in there, but there is this sense of distinctiveness, isn't there? And this is part of God's purposes. Yeah. Sean, do you want to come in? And then I want to go back to Sue with your revealing moment. Is that right?
Yeah. I think, man, it was again. I'm getting so excited just listening to you guys speak. I love the perspectives and just about that text, because you can get lost in what it is on Scripture, but there's so much more to that. Of course, the well, John 4. I also firstly thought of that, similar to if you are burdened, come to me, and we're in John 4. If you're thirsty, come to me. I'm the source. I'm the one. I'm the revealing. Again, I feel there's so much of that. But there was something significant is when the servant came and he brought the message, she responded. And I kind of feel the same as like a Mary situation where the angel appears and her response is, let it be to me according to your word. Let this, I'm receiving this. That doesn't make sense. Like when you were saying, like from a woman's point of view, like this guy just shows up. Hey, listen, this guy wants to marry you. Come with. In the natural, that's not a gopher thing. But when you said something, as church, we've got to be different. As children of God, we've got to, there's a difference in that where our responses are different. When the Spirit speaks to us, when God speaks to us, and we can respond. Though this might seem crazy, God's speaking. God saying, don't take from this land, go there. But when the word comes to her, she responds to that. It's a revealing in the Spirit, though in the natural she saw nothing. Only when she got there and she saw him did it confirm what she already probably felt within her heart that was in that moment. And I think so many times we try to figure things out instead of really just allowing God to speak to us and relying on him, standing on the word that he's given us. Interesting about, he was saying about Abraham, how he still kept going. What is the power of God's word in our life, right? That we can believe a word and for so long still continue. So I thought it was really just such a significant piece of the revealing again.
Sue, the revealing, where was it in this? And
well, it's interesting because it's the opposite, you see. And that was the bit that struck me as being strange. So verse 65, the servant says to Rebecca, asks who the man is, and he says, he's my master. And she takes her veil and covers herself. She doesn't want to be seen at that point. Now I'm just sitting here having a moment of blank, but I'm fairly sure that in the Jewish wedding ceremony there is a point at which the woman's veil is removed, and that's the point at which they kind of see each other. I'm fairly convinced I've got that right.
Yeah, you think later on in the story, and Jacob and how he gets turned over by the veil.
Yes.
Yeah, the veil still.
Yeah. So there's something. I mean, today we have this phrase, swipe left, swipe right. I have no idea what that means, but I know it's something to do with what you decide when you see. I don't know which way it is.
Demonstrating.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've just heard it swipe, so I'm just going swipe.
Yeah, exactly. So there's something about this business of trusting God when we can't actually see, but trusting him to actually reveal to us at the right time. And I think in our current situation, we can't see. I mean, who would have thought that we would be locked down again in Leicester? 6 weeks ago, we wouldn't have thought that, would we? So we can't see what the future is, but we can trust the God who tells us to carry the light stuff, because he can see and he will reveal it to us when we need to see it and not before. And I think we so desperately want to be able to see. So I'm actually going to preach a sermon on Sunday entitled How to Remain Faithful in a Secular Society. At least I'm going to try. And there's something, isn't there, about the distinctiveness of us as Christians being faithful and helping people to see that God is revealing slowly what we need to be doing. Food banks, compassion stuff, all that stuff. He is revealing that to us, but he's doing it slowly. He's not doing it quickly. I just want back to the rest, aren't we? And the Sabbath stuff.
Yeah. I just want to bring in Michaela here, who's commented, because you said about the distinctive thing there. So Michaela brings out another view on this, and I want us to hear this. She says, I'm always slightly uneasy with the concept of being God's special or distinctive people, and it's in, little speech bubbles. This tends to lead to many Christians thinking they are the elite in society. I've seen so much of this in Northern Ireland, and that's Michaela's context. Who's the chosen people? And so actually, I mean, John, you raised it to start with about, that we're called to be distinctive. Do you want to come back to Michaela in that a little bit? How do we not become, we're so much better than you, but hold on to a sense of God's chosen people? How does that work its way out?
I think the reason that we come back to, or what should be the counterbalance to any sort of pride, is the fact that we're God's special people, very much in inverted commas. We're not special because we're special. We're special because of grace. So there's nothing about us that has caused us to be recognized and affirmed by God as you're one of my people because you're cool and how would I cope without you? We're welcomed in by grace. And so it's nothing to do with us. And so, God arbitrarily almost chooses a bunch of people in the Old Testament, and their greatness isn't tied up in their ethnicity. And whenever they think that it is, then they've gone off the rails and they've got it wrong. Their greatness is tied up in the fact that because of God's grace, he's pulled them and drawn them into a relationship with him. and the responsibilities of that mean that they should behave in a certain way, which is anything but arrogant. You know, God was the God of the nations before he was the God of Israel. Israel, when functioning correctly, was supposed to be a blessing to the nations. There was a whole load of stuff about how to deal with foreigners who came into the sort of the orbit and realm of Israel, and you know, that old authorized version phrase, the alien at your gates. You always think of ET, but it's not. You know, how to deal with a stranger. So actually, if the people of God are taking seriously God's grace and who they've become by grace, it should lead to anything but pride. So I don't know if that helps at all, just in thinking about that.
Doesn't that take us to Romans?
I was thinking that. I
Exactly.
think that's a nice little step, beautifully done. It's like a little game of tennis, this, isn't it? So yeah, let's. I hope that helps, Michaela. But I think it's a really important thing for us to wrestle with, and so we have to check ourselves if it leads to that kind of, yeah, I'm more holier than you. I'm sure it's not a Jesus thing. But we've also got this Romans text to deal with. I don't do what I don't want to do. Is Paul having an existential crisis at this point? It's all about, you know, I don't do the sin that I wanted to do, and I do the right thing, I do the wrong thing. Sean, you're a bit of a Romans fan, I think.
Yeah, I love Romans. I think it's so beautiful.
What does this passage, what does it say to you in your gut?
Man. I think it's just exactly as John was just ending off on that. It's all by grace, because I think we tend to think we're that good. And I think that humanity is born in goodness and we're always good, but you find that it's absolutely the lie that the enemy tells many times we get caught up in. And we think that we can achieve this, or we're able to achieve everything that God wants us to do by our own strength. That's why I love when Hebrews also writes, Hebrews 12, when he says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. The context is not me. That's why Peter, when you look at Peter, he says, I love you, Lord. I'll fight for you. I'll do everything. He says, no, you will deny me. So in his ability, he had the idea. That's why he chopped off the ear. He was ready to fight. But when the context is shifted and Jesus heals the man, he puts the ear back, you see Peter's his ability, his strength is lost in the story. And so he then fails miserably. And I think this is what Paul's trying to say here, is that the things I want to do, I don't do, because I want to be nice to everybody. I don't want to have this things that I feel sometimes, and I'll be honest, like I'll kill you, and you don't really want to kill them, but you have that thought of maybe a hatred. And that's why Jesus lifts the bar of the law, and he says, even if you thought about it, you've done it. So the bar is raised so high in our flesh, and this is what Paul's saying here. He says, but that's the law, and by looking at him and looking at Christ, we find that that's the one, the revealing of the Father, revealing again of what Jesus did on the cross. In this text is to me such a beautiful part of what that is. It's by grace. And earlier, just as she said, the specialness isn't about who we think we are as, I've got everything sorted. I've got it all my ducks in a row. You know, sometimes we don't even have ducks. We all got hamsters, and they're just all over the show and they're just running crazy. But that's where I can find my peace and rest in him, focused on him in that context.
I really love, because I think if you read this, like, scripture is supposed to be heard aloud. We always forget that, don't we? We read in our books and our apps, but it would have been delivered and it would have been read. Paula Gooder's Phoebe book, which I think I've mentioned here before in this Muse, is a great way into Paul, actually. But she imagines Phoebe arriving with the letter to the church in Rome, because Paul gives this letter to her, and everyone's crowded in and they're listening to it, and you can kind of feel the energy. You know, I desire to do what is good, but I can't carry it out. And then you get to the end of this little passage. What a wretched man I am. And I'm very happy with the specific language there. Who will rescue me from this body of death? But thanks be to God through Jesus Christ. And you can almost feel that kind of like, who's going to step in and save me? Sue, Romans. Is that where you...
I like Romans 2, so I kind of, I would sit with this for a long time. It's so common, isn't it, for us to, well, maybe this is just me, to kind of think, I'm going to sort that out, I'm going to do that, and then half an hour later realize that actually I've gone off and done something completely different, and probably to somebody else's detriment. It is human nature. That's how we kind of are wired. And so that, going back to use that distinctive word again, I suppose, how can we actually be that different? Well, we can't, because we're human, but we can because of grace. So we're back to grace again. And we can say that till we're blue in the face, but actually living it can still be difficult, can't it? And encouraging other people to live it is nigh on impossible, I think. And yet it is so key to living that kind of restful life that Jesus wants us to live. And it's a continual battle in me to do the things I know God wants me to do and not the things I think I ought to be doing, actually.
John, are you in a continual state of battle? You can use this as an open confessional time if you like.
I absolutely am. And I think, this side of the new creation I always will be. And I think that's why I love this, because Paul's gone on like a relentless theological journey through the opening chapters of Romans that really starts with sin as a thing, sin as a universal problem. Then he introduces the solution to sin as being Jesus. So he goes through this whole theological thing. And these few verses in the middle of it, almost like a little kind of very human parenthesis. And I love that. And some people say, oh, this is Paul looking back on his pre-converted, pre-Damascus road, who he was then, and looking back on that and say that Jesus is the answer. I think that's nonsense in the context of what's happening here. I think this is Paul, Paul who, probably greatest church planter ever. It's given us all the, most of the doctrine and theology that you find in the sort of New Testament. All of that, and yet even he is saying effectively, I'm a work in progress and totally dependent on Christ, or when I screw up. And it makes me think Oscar Wilde once said, every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. And so I just find this massively encouraging. If Paul can acknowledge that he's a work in progress, dependent on the grace of God, and that he messes up, then that gives me hope for tomorrow. I'll take my failures for today to God. I know he won't hold it against me. I know from all the big theology in Romans that he'll look at me and he'll see the righteousness of Christ. And then I'll get off my arse and I'll try again tomorrow and I'll look to follow on. I think it's great.
That's good. That's good.
I think there's another perspective here too. I mean, I did read a commentary last night. Gosh, that was quite industrious of me, wasn't it? But someone sort of comparing the fact that, is this Paul having an existential crisis, or is it more, it's like a thought exercise, and it's as much about humanity's condition. It's not just about Paul, because to a certain extent in his other letters, this is not Paul. Paul is very much, I am very righteous. I mean, far be it from me to suggest that Paul had a bit of an ego, but I think he did. So, he talks in his other letters about being like not sort of being more righteous, and he kept the law really well. And that maybe this passage is also about the broader context of the way sin works in the world, and the way sin is, and he kind of personifies sin as well. This is quite, so there's the shades of the Garden of Eden and that kind of full narrative. And I think if I was preaching on Sunday, I think I'd want to unpack that a little bit, because I'm really aware, again, we read these passages all the time. It comes around every 3 years in the lectionary cycle, but what does it mean today? And right now we're wrestling with some really big stuff in society. So for us in the UK, in terms of the Black Lives Matter stuff, just this week we've had, and I'm going to get her name, is it Mina Smallman, but a woman whose daughters were killed, and just recently in London, and she's calling out the Metropolitan Police because these are Black young women that, their crime wasn't investigated, and then there's been this horrendous allegation that police officers took selfies with the dead bodies. And it's that kind of conversation that's around, institutions want to be better, but there's something about human nature that in our institutions and in our structures, sin is at work. And how do we kind of, how do we call that out? How do we address that? And I'm sure it's, I want to reference Walter Wink, but I can't remember the name of the book. It's probably Engaging the Powers, but how sin really works at a much bigger level. And, both within the church institution. Yeah, it's not inspiring you as much as it's inspiring me, I can tell. But I think that's kind of what's getting under my skin a little bit.
But if you think about this passage, I'm going to use the veiling word again. Paul is lifting the veil off how sin actually works in us, isn't he?
Okay.
That's what he's doing, and it works in us and therefore in every other human being. And there are some of us who by grace can do as John says and sit down and say, okay, so tomorrow we can be different. But of course the majority of society doesn't do that. The majority of society sits with that stuff still going on all the time, and they don't ever lift the veil off that. And that's why we end up with young women murdered in the park or wherever it was, and we end up with a man being killed because somebody kneels on his throat for however long. Because sin's veil doesn't get lifted and it doesn't get revealed in the way that we really need it to be.
And actually, in Romans, earlier on, Paul goes even bigger than sort of systemic institutional sin. He doesn't only say that systems and institutions are marred by sin. He points at creation, and he says that the whole of creation has been frustrated and groans eagerly for its redemption as a woman in childbirth. So he actually says, yeah, it actually screws up the whole shooting match. Yeah, it's not just us as individuals. It's not even just systems and governments and institutions. The whole created order is awaiting its ultimate final redemption that's been accomplished on the cross.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that. I think living in a society in I don't know if you've ever been to South Africa or maybe know some of the news. A lot of news nowadays are very fake news, and but we live in a very violent society in South Africa. Cape Town is rated as the 8th most dangerous city in the world, where a person every 2 to 3 minutes there is a murder happening in South Africa. It's crazy statistics between color and racist and a lot of different stuff. And so we find that is such a wild society, and no matter how much we try and fix it from a flesh point of view, you'll never get to fix it. No matter how hard we try. Just from my point of view, seeing in a society we've got great laws and you've got great stuff, that still doesn't fix the problem. We can try and work with the problem, or we can go to the root, and the root is right from the beginning. It's Adam at the tree. It's the very context of not choosing Christ but choosing flesh. And when you come to salvation, that's the key to it. And once that is there, and that's why I love when he gets later on in Romans chapter 12, when he says, you're changed by the renewing of your mind, the renewal of my thinking of what that is, because the Holy Spirit brought us, when we look at the description of the Spirit, to bring salvation for those who do not believe. But what does he lead us? He leads us in righteousness. So drawing us back again to who is the one that is the key. In my own flesh, I'm going to fail at this. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to constantly get to a place where I do mess it up. But in him, I find my forgiveness. In him, and I think that's the key to society, is finding Jesus, finding Christ. Yeah.
We're nearly at the end of our time. We could go on for much longer, but I just want to bring in a couple more comments near the end. Michaela says, thanks, John, for your comment earlier. Well done. I think that's on distinctiveness. Thank you for that. And she also says, in a strange coincidence, I was singing parts of Amazing Grace this morning, which actually is a really nice kind of last comment for us to rest on, really. It has to all be about grace, doesn't it? That's where we kind of come to and land. I always ask my guests as I finish, if you were preaching this Sunday on these texts, and I think for a variety of reasons, none of us are preaching on these texts, or even preaching. I've got a Sunday off preaching these texts on Sunday. But what is it that God might be saying to us as a church? What might we want to hear? What might your sermon be if you were using these texts, 1, 2, or 3 of them, to preach on Sunday? Who wants to go first?
I think I would have to go with the veil. And the veil being taken off and put on, and Jesus revealing who God is to us, and then what we can do with that revelation and how we share it. I think that's kind of what I would want to go with.
Excellent. Sue's revealing herself. That's where she's going. Good sermon. John, where would you go?
Genesis, I go distinctiveness and sovereignty of God. Romans, encouragement in the struggle. Matthew, a little bit about the ease of the yoke because of grace, and something probably tying the wisdom bit in with 1 Corinthians, where it talks about the message of the cross being foolishness. But the power of God to us who are being saved, and it goes on to talk about God frustrating the wisdom of the wise, and how God's foolishness, in inverted commas, is wiser than the wisest person. So that probably be my 3 approaches to those passages.
And would you do all 3?
No, I'd only do one. And
Wait,
I'm going to push one because it really taught me.
So which is the most important sermon to preach on Sunday if you're preaching those? If someone's listening in and they're prepping on these lectionary texts, where would you preach on Sunday?
I think it depends on the congregation with whom you've got a relationship.
He's done that. You can tell he's a media person.
Do they need encouragement? Is that where they're at? Do they do they need to hear about the distinctiveness and be reminded that we're different? Wisdom. So yeah, I think I'd choose on the basis of the congregation where I thought they were at.
Fair enough. If you're looking for a preacher on Sunday, John is happy to be booked, and just giving your context.
3 days notice, yeah.
And you've heard his sermon, so you've got a choice of 3. So you could say yes, we'd like that one, please. John, not a lectionary church at all, but if these were the passages that someone said you've got to preach on Sunday, where might you go?
Yeah, of course, I love Romans. I think it's such beautiful. But that Genesis text was I really enjoyed reading that again. And so I think for me, the well, I would have played around with the well and gotten into that, because I do think people need to hear that there's a place where you probably bring Romans into it, that you can't feed yourself, you can't quench your own thirst. And when the Spirit does speak to you and God speaks to you, is to listen. I think we would have less of what we do have in our life if we just obey when He speaks and not go into a different thought pattern thinking, I can fix this problem. I can sort this out. When he says, yeah, I would have gone with that. It was really nice.
And I think if I was preaching, I'm going to preach on sin. I think I'd want to talk about sin and what it is and how it's ours collectively. It's not just that person over there, because I think there could be a lot of demonizing of individuals as we kind of look at some stuff that's going on, but collectively, but holding that all in that sense of grace and more grace, and probably landing with the Matthew bit, I think, about the yoke of Jesus, because I think that's how we deal with our sin, by bringing our stuff to Jesus. I think that's what I would preach, but I'm not preaching. So I just want to say thank you so much to Sue and John and Sean for joining me for this conversation, sharing your wisdom. I really hope if you've been watching at home or if you pick it up later that you've enjoyed our conversation. I'll be back next week, I think with 3 completely different faces next week. I might have 3 newbies next week, I can't remember, but do please check back in with us and enjoy these conversations and join in. But thank you for all those who've contributed today, and whatever you're doing today, I hope and pray that you look out for those God incidences and see where God is at work in your life. Thank you so much.